Good morning and welcome back to the Great Lakes International Innovation Summit. We appreciate that you're with us this morning. For our first panel, we're going to hear from three organizations who are working to increase diversity and inclusion in innovative ways. And at this time, I'd like to welcome Lamont Mackley, Chief Inclusion and Outreach Officer for Jumpstart, who's going to moderate our panel. Thank you so much, team.
Oh, thank you so much, Megan. I very much appreciate that. And I am really excited, very much excited about talking about diverse innovation and what it means and how we engage with it. I am just privileged to have the honor to facilitate this discussion. So I'm very much looking forward to it. My name is Lamont Mackley. I'm the Chief Inclusion and Outreach Officer for Jumpstart. I have the privilege, as I said, to be the moderator, facilitator of this particular discussion. I'm excited about it because there's so many sort of angles. There's so many different ways of thinking about diverse innovation. And I think the parties that we have who are joining me on this panel to discuss this are going to bring out these different aspects and hopefully engage you as a part of the discussion. We certainly hope you're going to be entering your chat questions and etc. So that we can engage with you around this discussion and take it in various different directions. So we have hopefully at the end of this hour or so, we have a good perspective of what we're talking about when we talk about diverse innovation. With that though, let me introduce the panel and basically have them introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with me. My name is Lamont Mackley. As I said, I'm the Chief Inclusion and Outreach Officer at Jumpstart. I've been involved in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship activities my entire life. I have a background in law, I have my law degree, but I got into banking and I started to really facilitate engagement with my clients from a different perspective than just a traditional, you need a loan or you need a checking account and all of that. I got involved in development banking very early, went that path in my career, had the privilege and honor of running 3 different community development banks across the United States. And it allowed me to touch my clients, particularly underserved, underappreciated communities more, and allowed me to understand the plight of how to introduce resources from an economic perspective, financial perspective, and to entrepreneurs that needed to learn and know about those things. So I just feel honored to have had that career and that experience. Led me to Jumpstart, who's an entrepreneurial organization here in Ohio, specifically Cleveland, Ohio. And now the privilege of it just engaging even more deeply with many communities from a diverse population standpoint. So I'm privileged to be the facilitator this morning. I'd like to introduce to you George. George, I'd like for you to just take a quick second and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Lamont. So my name is George Zarebski. Everybody calls me Ski. I'm actually from Chicago originally, but live in Columbus right now with my wife and 4 children under 12, kind of set the image there. After high school, I joined the Air Force, spent a few years there and retired. After that, I entered into the official entrepreneur startup world and had a successful exit from a tech startup. And right now I'm the founder and COO of the Urban Accelerator X. And we're an entrepreneur support organization in Columbus, Ohio, on the Near East side in that area of town. And our focus is to help the community that we live in start and grow their businesses and try to allow them to have a successful growth plan and serve those traditionally not celebrated entrepreneurs, the mom and pop shops, the side hustlers, and those folks. So that's a quick snippet of who I am, and I'm really excited to be here and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, George. I'm excited that you are joining us this morning to help facilitate and engage in this particular topic. And with that, let me introduce Amanda. Amanda, would you come on, please? Yes. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Thank you so much, Lamont, and thank you to the conference for having me. Like George, I've been really looking forward to this. So my name is Amanda Poole, and I hail from Indianapolis, where I work with High Alpha Innovation. We are a venture studio that partners with corporates and universities to build new startups. And so my background, I started my career in startups myself, leading talent functions, specifically putting those HR infrastructure foundations in place once the company reached a point, usually around Series A, and then oftentimes recruiting a big part of their team. That led me to actual new venture building with High Alpha, where in the past 4 years, I've been able to contribute to the launch of over 24 companies. And we focus mostly in Indianapolis or in other tier 2 cities like Minneapolis. We've got companies in Ohio and in Atlanta. We're essentially a startup factory. And so my perspective is kind of unique in the way that we launch companies. And as the leader of talent, I have an ability to impact the diversity and inclusion efforts, not only for our company, but for the companies that we launch.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. We're honored to have you here with us today as well to help us facilitate in this discussion about diverse innovation. So let's get started with a little bit of talk about what each of our organizations are about and what we're doing. And George, I'll come to you first. Can you give us a little bit more insight into the Urban Accelerator and a little bit more of how it touches on the subject matter of diverse innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off with a little bit of the why and how we got started. So I mentioned earlier that I was an exited entrepreneur and I fell in love with the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So when I arrived in Columbus in late 2018, I hit the ground running, just trying to get engaged with the community. I joined 1 Million Cups. I went to all the different startup organizations in the area, attended all the events. And after about a year, I realized that there was a huge gap. And being kind of a subservient, giving person, I was looking, how could I fit into this ecosystem? How could I pay forward the things that I learned over those years? And I identified that there was a lot of celebration for the potential unicorns, for the tech companies, the biomeds, those highly innovative companies that were on track to be the billion-dollar companies. But nobody was really paying attention to really the backbone of our community, the neighborhood businesses, the corner stores, the quickie marts, the hairdressers, all of these, entrepreneurs that really are the core of our economy. And at the time, I didn't really even understand it in a sense to be able to explain it like I am now, but I could feel it. And it was a gut feeling. So I got with some like-minded folks and we set out to build this entrepreneur support organization. And we, signed a lease on our facility September of 2019 with the intent to challenge the assumption that the side hustlers don't really need any help, right? So we wanted to give those folks more awareness and engagement and training to help them in their journeys, because we all know the stats. We know that most businesses fail within the first couple of years, and especially those that don't have a background or a network to help them succeed. So we kind of wanted to position ourselves to be that network to help those companies get the resources and education and training that they needed. Shortly after we set out on this journey, the mayor's office here in Columbus released a small business agenda. This small business agenda was done by an agency called Next Street, and it was a culmination of an 18-month survey of the state of entrepreneurship in Columbus. And they identified things that we kind of inherently knew, that there was a lack of awareness for resources, that there was a lack of post-launch support to businesses. So once they got started and they were ready to scale, there was not an immediate support network there to help them with that. And it was really hard for people of color and women to be able to get funding for their businesses. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, which is where we really, saw the synergy, is that the entrepreneur support organizations were struggling to reach the businesses in these underserved neighborhoods. So we saw that, and you can only imagine our shock and awe when we had a very validated document that backed up what our assumptions were, even though we hadn't done that level of research, and it was right in line with our efforts. So ultimately, what came of that is we had positioned ourselves to fill a need that was not only identified by our small community, but also at a civic level. So that was really good, and there was a lot of movement in Columbus with Smart Columbus as well around this time. So it was really just a perfect mesh to start this journey. Now, enter COVID. We had to pivot a little bit. We opened in January of 20, and you guys know the rest of the history of 20. So we had to transition a little bit and innovate internally to be able to stay afloat and continue our mission. But we've learned so much over the past 2 years in the line of the needs of the community, in the line of the resiliency of our community, and also with partners. There was a lot of things that happened in 2020 outside of COVID as well. There was a lot of civil unrest. There was a lot of drama in our communities. Yeah. And because of that, we actually received a lot of support and engagement from agencies in the community at civic levels, at nonprofit organizational levels, other incubators, accelerators. And as tragic as these events were, all encompassing in 2020, it's really been like a launch pad to create a new level of innovation, a new awareness of diversity. And I'd like to just take a quick moment to just highlight something that I think is important and often overlooked, especially for people in my community. Diversity does not mean making sure you have people of color, or making sure you have women, or making sure you have people from other countries and cultures on your team. There's two main types of diversity, arguably. So there's inherent diversity, which is where you're from, the things that you just were brought into this world with, your environment, your life experiences. But then there's also acquired diversity. And the acquired diversity is what you're gaining through your own intentional actions throughout your life. If you choose to learn another language, or if you choose to spend time in another country and learn another culture. And all of these things are important. So I just want to highlight that when we talk about diversity and the need for it to have this inclusion, to be able to innovate, that it's not just a black and white thing. Right? It's very nuanced, and it's very layered. And just a quick blurb to leaders: don't just fill the check boxes, right? Don't just say, oh, I've got this many people of color and this many of this gender, or it's not about that. It's about understanding your culture in your corporation, your community, your organization, and actively finding other diverse folks that can fill that. They may be the same color, they may be the same gender, but you really have to be deliberate in understanding what we mean by diversity and inclusion, and deliberate in how you employ that in your culture. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we're trying to do. We do have the training aspect of the Urban Accelerator X, but we also focus heavily on helping organizations understand that need. So we do some business consulting, we do facilitation of curriculum. We also help folks that have curriculum and they're trying to reach a certain demographic, make their curriculum culturally competent. And we're a small team, but obviously we can't do it on our own. So we also have to be very diverse and innovative in the way that we collaborate with our peers. So this past 2 days of this conference have been absolutely amazing. Yeah. And I thought I was really well ingrained in the entrepreneurial ecosystem before today, but I'm finding out that, there's really so much more out there to learn. So I'm going to eat my own dog food and really take a proactive effort to get more engaged with the community that I've been so blessed to meet here over the past 2 days.
Thank you, George. I very much appreciate that and your insights and the introduction to the work that you're doing. I'm actually going to do a couple things here. One, I want to make sure that all of you who are listening to this, if you have questions, even as you heard George or hear the rest of us talk, please get those questions in the chat so that we can address them as we go. You've already prompted this for me, George, this whole thing around diversity and what it means and et cetera. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that perhaps later. The second thing I'm going to do is go out of what the traditional polite order is. And Amanda, I'm going to introduce you in just a second, but I'm going to say a few words about Jumpstart so that people know a little bit more about how we got involved in this process. For those of you who don't know, Jumpstart is an entrepreneurial development organization. It's located in Cleveland, Ohio. I've been with the organization now 11 years. The organization has been in existence since 2004. It's a part of what the state of Ohio did through the Third Frontier to really address the question of the third frontier. And literally, that is entrepreneurship, venture capital, innovation, and how to bring all of that in a very direct, intentional way into Ohio. Our organization is responsible for the activities that go on through the state of Ohio in the Northeast Ohio and Northwest Ohio region of the state. We got involved early on, very early on, in this whole idea of diversity and inclusion and equity. And our leadership through Ray Leach, who's the CEO, founding CEO actually, has always been interested in making sure that we were diverse. But we got really, really intentional about it through the engagement roughly about 2010, where we even put more focus on driving more engagement with our communities that we were working with. Clearly, we were working with the innovative community, quote unquote, venture capitalists. People were involved in the desire to create and to enhance and to develop new innovations and new technologies. But we also got pushed into, primarily because of the community need, into looking at basically non-tech organizations and taking some of the tools that we learned, some of the things that we've been doing with our tech companies that were now being successful. They were having exits and we were doing any kinds of things that are viewed success, and starting to utilize those tools with our non-tech community, basically our neighbors, and helping small businesses utilize those tools in order to grow their businesses and have more impact directly on our local community and our local neighborhoods, which in Cleveland tend to be diverse and needed those tools. And we needed to be a good citizen about that, but also really thinking about how we can help our economy because we're allowing ourselves to engage more directly with it. As I said earlier, we got involved with creating things like the Emerging Market Fund, which was a fund for basically high growth entrepreneurs, particularly minority entrepreneurs to engage with. Our Focus Fund, which was definitely focused on diverse entrepreneurs and providing tech funding for their operations. We started to really get engaged with the community by inviting, and we had not necessarily been intentional about this, inviting more of the minority community to engage with us, to actually come into our environment and to learn who we were and to experience some of the things that we thought were things that could help them provide and develop their activities, which would have an impact on the community through entrepreneurship. But I want to say one other thing about what we're doing at Jumpstart that I'm so pleased to be involved in, and that is that in order to be a good example, in order to be really genuine and sincere about what we're doing, we not only have to invite people in as guests, we have to invite people in as participants in our organization. And so we really started focusing on hiring people who look like the people that we are serving in our community. And so, changing who our employees are and our teammates are, changing our board to look like the community, developing partnerships with others, our suppliers, the way we communicate, the way we celebrate both each other's success, but also each other's culture and nationality. We just finished a Hispanic Heritage Month, and we were involved in celebrating that and engaging in that. The way that we work about respecting each other and who you are, who the unique person you are, and what you bring to the table in terms of our organization or society. And you said something, George, which I want to just reemphasize to our audience as well. That whole idea of listening, taking a moment to really listen to others who might not look like you or from a different culture, and listen and learn from them and interact with them and respect them and what they bring to the table. I call this whole activity, this DE&I activity, bringing into your organization in such a way that it naturally becomes a part of the DNA of our organization. And that's what we at Jumpstart are attempting to do, and making every effort and learning how to do it each and every day. So with that, I held back on introducing Amanda in terms of your operation, Amanda, and how you are working through Resilient Venture Studio. And I'm going to allow you to talk about that because you're going to share with us some slides. And
Yes,
that's going to help us move right into our discussion even more, our Q&A part of our presentation even more, because you're going to highlight some things for us about your organization and kind of get us going as far as questions are concerned. And again, we want questions in our chat too. Okay, Amanda.
Great. Thanks so much, Lamont. Let me take the steering wheel here and share my screen. Give me just a moment. And so interesting to hear your perspectives and how similar they are to ours at High Alpha. So I'll start by talking a little bit about us as an organization. We are a venture studio. So we helped pioneer this model, which is essentially the marriage of capital, so funding companies at the idea phase. 2 is actual ideation and conception of companies. And then 3rd is very heavy-handed support of these companies. So we've been doing this for 6 years now. And so now we have some data points that we're very proud of. We've launched today, I think it stands at 33 new companies. We focus on B2B SaaS, but within B2B SaaS, we have companies really across every industry and vertical, from fintech to marketing tech to we've got a live concert streaming platform and supply chain, and we just launched a vet tech company. So we launch companies. We fund those companies at the pre-seed stage, so that way they can get up and running. And then we provide services in order to be able to see those companies scale. And so what we try to do is give those founders as much focus on the core competencies of their business, and we can take everything else off their plate and really be experts in it. And so our companies have hired over 1,000 employees. We have hired over 60 founders, and we have raised over $260 million ourselves. So with that, we found an opportunity not only to just build independent ventures, individual companies, but actually build full studios that serve a certain community. And so the first of those studios is Resilient Venture Studios. And we built Resilient to address how difficult it is for an immigrant entrepreneur to actually build a company. And sorry, my slides are not, there we go. And so Resilient serves specifically immigrant entrepreneurs who would like to build a company. And funnily enough, this is such an underserved part of the market. But actually, if you take a look at all of the unicorns that in existence in the US, actually over 55% of them have been started by immigrants. So this is a really, this is a population that is uniquely positioned to be successful at launching a company, but also very uniquely positioned to not really have the ease of access as many of us. So you all probably are familiar with Eric Wan. He's been on our minds a lot lately as we've spent the 2 years behind Zoom screens. But his visa application was actually rejected 8 times. The fact that he was able to build such an important company in the U.S. is phenomenal, and he could have stopped any one of those 8 times. And so, as an immigrant, there's a few things that are happening here. First of all, it's really difficult to go at it alone. If you own over 50% of a company, you actually can't have your visa sponsored. Oftentimes, visas are very connected to their employers. And then the process is really, really difficult. As our internal HR lady, myself, I've had some really tough situations with the H-1B lottery or clarity with legal documents and going back and forth with the government, racking up legal bills in order to just do the right thing by our employees who are trying to work here and contribute in the U.S. So this is an example of the type of entrepreneur we were looking to attract with Resilient Venture Studio. So high potential entrepreneur who is hesitant to actually go out and leave her secure job in order to start a company. So in order to do that, she has to go out and raise money. She has to own less than 50% of the equity. She's got to go find board members who can contribute to her success. And she has to be able to pay herself a prevailing wage. That's a really unique part of this visa issue is oftentimes entrepreneurs, they're bootstrapping or they're saying, I don't need a salary because I want to build this company. That's actually not doable when you are on, when you're an immigrant on a visa. And so the way that the studio helps that is, one is we contribute capital. So we're going to fund Sahana from day one with pre-seed dollars. That means that she can actually take a salary to make herself financially solvent and pass those gates in the visa process. Two is that because of the nature of the venture studio model, her equity stake is going to be sub 50%. Which many people may have questions about of how can you position that as a positive, but in reality it is. She would be a sub 50% by the time she got through the capital fundraising process. But with the studio model, what she also gets is our support and our network. We will build a board for her. We will help recruit founders. Because oftentimes what underrepresented groups, not just the immigrant population that I'm talking about with Resilient, is they lack the network because we traditionally have not been in these rooms. And so we don't have the friends and family who we can raise a friends and family round through. We don't have the friends who we can recruit as early founders who are top tier talent. So those are just a few ways that the studio addresses her needs specifically as an immigrant. Oh, sorry, we lost some slides there. But so this is how, again, how we address it is we'll sponsor the visa. We'll make sure that we tap our network for future rounds of funding, for early hires, for customers. We can help fast track a green card, which is the final step in feeling real security and being able to navigate employment in the US. We'll actually form the new company. And so our company, High Alpha Innovation, we go through all of the legwork to manage the term sheet, manage the terms and conditions for the best interest of the company, the cap table. And then finally, once we get her up and running, our team will take everything off of her plate besides building her product and getting that product to market. So me and my team, we don't only recruit the founders, but we're their internal HR team. So we're figuring out how to hire that employee in California, how to recruit software engineers in this market. And then my colleagues in finance and design and marketing are also bridging some of those gaps. And so all of that is to say that we built Resilient Venture Studio. We did this back in, we launched in February of last year. We worked with 3 immigrant entrepreneurs to design their business model. And we are in the process of continuing to form those businesses.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amanda. We very much appreciate it in terms of getting us started, in terms of some of the things that are going on. One thing I picked up both with your presentation and George's presentation was this whole idea that it's an expansive, diverse platform arena that we're talking about. So you mentioned immigrants as an example of another diverse population that should be addressed. George was talking about it's more than black and white, and of course it is black and white. But I'm going to say it's also what the gender or chosen gender affiliation or association a person might have. It's culture. I think, George, you mentioned that as well. Nationality certainly is a piece of it. How about age diversity as it relates to that? How about people who've had different types of past experiences, and some of them might be viewed as negative in terms of their history? How do you bring those populations into this diverse question as well? And so there's a whole group of diversity that's really important for us to consider, not just the traditional, as you said, George, the black and white question. There are many, many different forms of diversity that we should be bringing into our organizations, corporations, in order for us to really have a more positive society. That brings up this question that I want to ask both of you all, and that is, why should organizations be making investments in diverse, innovative initiatives? Why is that important, really? I mean, let's get right to the heart of the matter. Why does this make a difference? Go ahead, George.
I guess I'll jump in. And this will actually be kind of brief. In preparation for our panel, of course, I did a little bit of Googling, a little bit of research. And, I decided to go the opposite side. Why is diversity bad? Why does diversity halt innovation? And I was actually surprised that I didn't find anything. There was nothing out there that said, so I think the takeaway for me was that everybody understands it. The data is out there. People that are way more smarter than me have done the research, they've done the studies. So it's an easy find for anybody to go out there and see how and why the diversity helps. So the question is, why are we still talking about it? And I guess that kind of goes back to my point earlier of, I think the lay person has a very sophomoric understanding of what it really means, what it really implies. It's easy. I think an example to give is we take Google, right? It was started off by two white guys that met in college. And when they started their business, they started hiring more friends, more people that hung out at the bar with them or did whatever it was that they did, right? Not that they hung out at the bar, but there's this implicit bias that we have that's unconscious sometimes, and sometimes it is conscious, where we always want to do things with people that apparently share similarities to us, whether it's in basketball, sports, or academically, whatever it is. But the problem with that is then you enter an echo chamber, right? So now you're just hearing back what it is that you already like. And so I think you really have to challenge yourself to really have a devil's advocate, kind of challenge your own assumptions, challenge your own desires. And I try to employ that, in everything that we do. I think this is the right way to go, but let me find all the reasons why maybe it's not. And in doing so, you really find out that there's a lot of great ideas that are out there that you would never even have been able to conceive just because you didn't have this experience that another person had. I think we can all agree with the concept that you don't have to like someone to work with them. And I think we can agree that, every relationship has its own dynamics. And that's kind of true across whether it's a personal relationship, a business relationship, but we always make sacrifices for the greater good. And I think the thing that we need to understand is we have to be deliberate about making the sacrifice of being uncomfortable, of not surrounding yourself with an echo chamber, so that you can get these other points of view, these other perspectives. And so again, the data is out there. There's a lot of scientific terminology by people way smarter than me. So I'm just trying to come at it from a grassroots ground level. Like, what does it really, really mean? And I think ultimately it really means challenging the status quo and actively looking for people that have experiences outside of your own, whether it's they were born with it or whether they went out and tried to diversify themselves intentionally. And when you do that, I think you can find a lot of natural examples in society where that just brings a lot more growth potential to whatever your business is, whether it's a product or a service. A quick example is the self-driving cars by Google. This was probably, and I'll just preface it with probably, it was probably developed and intended to serve people that were really smart, knew it could happen, and they wanted to have the cool self-driving car. But the second order effect of that was there's a lot of vision or hearing impaired people that could absolutely benefit from this technology. And it would be life-changing, this technology.
Wow.
So do you bring those people in the beginning so that you can help develop from the ground up for that community? I say yes, because if you do that, then you're not only benefiting, you're actually fulfilling a need, you're actually innovating for a need to fill a large portion of our society, global society, but then inherently it's already going to be better than it would be if you'd have just done it for, people that aren't vision impaired. So, just very high level example, but I think it's very clear that there is a benefit,
Wow, you just brought up a whole nother diverse community that clearly has a need, but also can make a contribution. I mean, it comes with a solving a problem, but it also comes with a need that not only solves a problem for a certain population, but also can be beneficial to the entire population. That great example, great ideas. Amanda, what do you say about that question in terms of why should we make these investments in diverse innovative initiatives?
Yeah, well, I think George hit the nail on the head where we think about the financial incentives is we can unlock whole new markets and ideas that would not readily be available. And so while in that same vein of, while we're talking about just strictly financial, why is it good business to invest in innovation and diverse communities, is that's a very compelling one. Second, this probably is no news to anyone who's on this call, but the numbers just show that diverse teams and diverse organizations just produce better financial results. It's as simple as that. More on the fluffy side, it's simple. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah,
About who we are as humans and what we're doing on this planet. If you have any issue with helping people who look different than you, we might have to talk about some other stuff. But it's the right thing to do. And I think finally, you unlock new business models. There's so much that's not apparent to me as a white woman that people of color or disabled people or veterans or the LGBTQ community, they understand their needs in a way that I never will. And if I'm looking to have a financial return, they can oftentimes highlight an opportunity that I'm unaware of.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. And it's that different perspective of how people look at things because of their background, their experience, their culture, their nationality, and you're looking at it through your lens, which is good. We celebrate that too, but you also need to be open to looking at it through others' lens. And what that I think produces is a better society, a better business, probably better, not probably, I would argue, better results to solving problems and et cetera. So there's a real incentive to do this. And I'm thinking more people, more organizations, both profit and nonprofits, are getting into that value now. And we want to go ahead and encourage that. I've got some other questions, but I'm also saying to the audience, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat there. So what are some of the challenges? This is easy to talk about. We should be doing this, but what are some of the challenges that faces innovators of diverse backgrounds? What is some of the things that we need to address that are challenges, and suggest perhaps some solutions as it relates to that?
Yeah, I think George really highlighted an important challenge, which is maybe the most systemic, is pattern recognition in those that hold the power to make decisions, whether that's investing. The people who hold the power oftentimes are white men, and that doesn't make them bad or any worse at what they're doing. But this is oftentimes they look and they see a Mark Zuckerberg, they see the founders of Google, the founders of Snapchat and Instagram, and they see early 20-something white men who might have a certain way that they talk, a certain way that they present themselves, a certain confidence being in a room of people who look like them.
Yes.
Very, very different footing for a woman to walk in and pitch to a room full of men, or a person of color to be the only person of color in a room when they're making a big ask of decision makers. So I think that's one that is just really, really hard for someone who doesn't come from a diverse background to understand. I think I pulled up some numbers in preparation for this discussion. Out of VC decision makers, only 2.3% of that money goes to women, and only 12% of VC decision makers are women.
Wow.
And that's so much worse for our Black community, where only 1% are decision makers of color, and 1% of VC dollars go to Black founders. And so these are atrocious numbers if you look at the composition of our population.
Yeah, and what's really sad about that, and from a women perspective, I think about my tradition, African American tradition, and I think about what I watched my mother do, and I never use this term, of course, as I watched her and as I grew up in my house, but great innovators. The history of the African American plight here in the United States clearly has that innovation leadership from women, Black women, who actually moved our movement to a whole nother level because of their innovation in how to proceed, how to protest, how to make things happen, just all of that. And again, I'm not going to my personal history, but I watched my mother innovate every day. I didn't know it. I didn't understand it, but
Yeah.
she was innovating every day because there were problems that had to be solved. They were real problems that had to be solved, and they had to be innovation around. George, you've had some interesting experiences. I noted in looking at your bio and talking to you, in terms of this whole activity about coming into environments and having maybe an opportunity for another company to be involved with you, and how that changed things and how that challenge came about for you and your experience. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I do want to start off, though, real quick on the topic of the challenges. Again, we've highlighted what the obvious challenges are, but Amanda made a comment about veterans being diverse. And obviously, I mentioned earlier, I'm a retired Air Force veteran. And it really painted a picture immediately, and I just feel like I have to share it with the world. So, this is a great example of an organization, probably, arguably one of the most innovative organizations on the planet that is composed of people from every culture and background on the planet, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to try to tell you that there's no bias, that there's no issues in the military. There definitely is. But we live in a different structure in the military. You don't have the same freedoms you have. And so you don't have a choice to not work with the person you were put next to. And so that kind of, in a way, forces innovation. Now, obviously, we can't do that at IBM or Apple and those places, but I think it is worth a look. I think it is worth a study for any leaders out there to try to just understand the concept of, here's a whole 1% of the population, and we're all volunteer force, which is unique for most of the planet. And we're still able to do this. So it is possible. It's absolutely possible to be done. You just really have to have the desire and the will. So thank you for letting me go there. And to your question, Lamont, so the life experience, I'm a little passionate about it. I'm a little emotional about it. And to be very frank, it's a very large portion of why I built the U. My life experience of going from a kid on the south side of Chicago in the underserved, underrepresented community, really wishing there was something out there. There was something that I needed that wasn't there. I've realized as an adult that it was mentorship, it was guidance. And then the Air Force, right out of high school, gave me that. And so this became part of my acquired diversity. Now, I'm, of course, to be in a position, in a location with people from different cultures and different backgrounds, and we have to learn how to play nice in the sandbox. 23 years later, I retire. I've acquired a lot of skills and a lot of awareness, traveled different countries, and really just more of that acquired diversity. But then after I retired, a couple of friends say, hey, do you want to do a startup? Let's do a tech startup. And I go, okay, yeah. So there's 3 of us, and now we start our entrepreneurial goal. Even though I've always kind of had the side hustle, doing websites or car stereo installations, just, whatever. I never really considered myself an entrepreneur until that point. And we started to really engage with entities that were designed to help us. So we went through incubators, we went through Y Combinator. We had a lot of experiences to help us on our journey. 1 Million Cups, have to give them a shout out. And it really helped propel us into a position to where we could actually have a sustainable business. Our team, I have a white woman from the country in North Dakota, grew up on the farm, right? No city life experience whatsoever. And she is a developer, primary coder, right? And then we have another male who was Mark Perea, so Hispanic last name. He's from New York. He had traveled in the military, spent some time, and he ended up in North Dakota. That's how we became friends. I was stationed there as well. So the 3 of us get together, and obviously a Black kid from Chicago, right? So we get together and we start this company, and we had good success, but we were bootstrapped. So we were really like, oh, what are we going to do at a certain stage in our business? Lo and behold, this big company from the East Coast comes out and says, hey, we love your product. We love what you're doing. We want to marry you. We want to do this acquisition. And we're green, wet behind the ears. We're like, let's do this, We do a little bit of due diligence and we make the deal. We fly out, we visit with them, we're spending time, and they're saying, we really want to focus on diversity. We really want to focus on inclusion. We know that that's going to help us grow our business and scale our business. And we're standing in their corporate offices, and I'm looking around, and there's one Black guy other than me. And then he left, actually. I took his position. There was one woman, and she was in an administrative role. And the rest were, I would say 18 to 25-year-old white men that were the developers, not to mention the CEO of the company is a white male, probably in his 30s. And so clearly there was a need. So I was excited. I was super excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what we're talking about. I get to be part of that change. I get to have an impact and help this culture grow and begin, and just super excited. One of the first things that I wanted to do was talk to the other Black guy. I said, hey, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get together and help this thing convert? You know, but that's my personality. I'm just very naive and eager, and let's just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. So fast forward, you know, we had been promised certain levels of leadership because we were all founders and executive positions in our company, as well as, you know, doing the grunt work. And it was not long before we really saw that I believe they wanted to increase their diversity. I do believe that, and I do believe they want to be more inclusive, but they definitely didn't talk to anybody to figure out how to best do that. And so what ended up happening was, well, I'll say this, you know, I'm a Black male, inferiority complex. I'm in a position that is dominated by all white males, and I've never seen anything that gave me reason to believe somebody that looked like me or was from where I was from would be able to operate at that level in an environment. So whereas with my team, I felt super comfortable just, hey, here's what I think, I'm throwing it out there. With this new team, I was very hesitant. I gave a lot of pause and I tried to read the room, and maybe this isn't the best time for me to express my idea. So I have to take responsibility for that on my part. Conversely, there wasn't a lot of, hey, what do you think, Ski? You know, what's your experience with this? And if it was, and if we did insert ourselves, it was quickly dismissed because it wasn't, you know, in line with what they were used to. The same thing for our Candace. She was our CEO, lead developer. She was lead business person. She was the backbone of our business, right? Gave her no respect, offered her these positions, and really just, so I got to see it firsthand happening. And, you know, I'm very much the type of person, like I said, to not just call it a black and white thing. You know, it's I know way more nuanced. I'm mature enough to understand there's many layers to this. But my takeaway from that is, again, this was an intent. I don't think they were just trying to check boxes. I mean, this company had a lot of money. They didn't need to check boxes. They were small enough where they weren't on many people's radar, but they were large enough where they really didn't need to care about other people's opinions either. So I do believe they had intent, but I think they just missed the mark on pulling the trigger on that. And I look at them now. They've gone public, they're very visible, and the structure really hasn't changed. And that's just indicative of what we're seeing across the board. So that's the story there. And you know, I don't really have a true takeaway other than take it for what it's worth and pull what applies to you.
Yeah, George, your story really unlocked for me the difference between diversity and inclusion, where that is something that we talk about DE&I, and I think that it's not as well understood, the actual inclusion part. I similarly, if your organization is not making space for your diverse team members to come as they are, then you're failing at inclusion. I have a similar story where a founder that I worked with was speaking on a panel, incredible human being. I know him and trust him implicitly, but it was speaking to a group of women. And one of his pieces of advice was to, you know, show up and act like the people who you're trying to influence. Very, very well-intentioned piece of advice. George, you talked about how you you look within and take responsibility for the way that you present. But if we come, our diverse backgrounds are valued, but we can only show up and act and speak and behave like white men, then we're failing. And so understanding that people of diverse backgrounds are going to show up differently, and to not, while it might be new to you, it's not a negative. That's a big part of the inclusion.
Yeah, and both of you all bring out something that's real important, and that is they did not honor the differences. They didn't honor what could be valued out of allowing someone to have an opportunity to voice their opinion, voice their idea, that could be shaped perhaps in being something even more impactful for the company. That was a lost to me. It's a lost opportunity when you don't value all of what a person's unique experience or their uniqueness to certain solutions. If you don't value that, there's a problem for opportunity that's missed as far as the company is concerned. And from a personal perspective, is a matter, it's a disrespect. It clearly is a disrespect, and it doesn't facilitate the kind of relationships that we should be valuing and celebrating, in my opinion, in our society. That will make our society better. But let's focus on some more on the solution part of this, in terms of what tactics can we suggest that will help combat the barriers that keep us from really having the kind of success that we want to have in with diverse innovation. What are some of the solutions? What can we leave with our audience about what they can think about doing?
Yeah, I'll hop in. So first and foremost, conversations like these. This is the most important part
Yes.
of making change. They're making investments. So we've heard so much, especially with the highlight on racial inequality last year. We had so many organizations step up and make statements because they are well-intentioned and they do want to help, but they don't know where to start. So some very easy ones are you can make investments in impact funds, in funds, and of course, my perspective is always going to kind of come from a VC perspective. But there are funds that invest specifically in diverse founders and nothing else. Two is actually giving your expertise and your time and your network, because oftentimes that's what underrepresented founders do not have access to. Is they don't know a board member who they can call about their go-to-market strategy. They don't have that contact at that VC that they want to have, or that big company they want to sell into. So really open yourself up and make yourself individually responsible for contributing. There's some great organizations where there are cheat codes now, where if you want to hire a diverse team, you can look at the Mom Project, for example. And I'm going to preface this with we're investors in both of these companies, but that's how I'm familiar and super passionate about them. But the Mom Project taps into women who've left the workforce to be a caregiver. And when they want to reenter the workforce, we're talking about lawyers, executives, sometimes administrative, really anything across the board. The Mom Project connects companies to that untapped talent of people who are reentering the workforce. And then Valence is another company led by Kobe Fuller, who is a Black investor from Upfront Ventures. He was just tired of hearing the excuse of we don't have access to Black talent. And so he created a community in Valence where it's specifically for top tier Black talent. And you can tap into that marketplace through one of those really easy ways to help your efforts.
Excellent. George, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Amanda's response was, filled up pretty complete answer, but there are a few things I think I would like to just highlight that I think can be added. Normalization, right? Again, these conversations, that's what we're trying to do, is whether deliberately or unintentionally, it's really just normalize it so that it becomes the norm. And maybe through unified marketing campaigns. Marketing has done a great job in the line of smoking cessation and other things, right? If I could be so bold, I'd say, we have to make people feel bad, put pressure on peer pressure to not want to think about these things. We have to make people want to do it. And like Amanda said, from the inside, it has to be a deliberate thought, has to be an intentional action. But on the other end, I would say, thinking about how I can make an impact through our organization, really through putting this into training. Like I alluded to earlier in my own personal experience, it's not a one-way street. Once you get into a situation where people want your diversity, you have to be able to deliver it as well. So you have to understand the overarching issue, the larger issue, the 30,000-foot view, if you will, to really understand where you fit into that puzzle and be deliberate in your actions as that diverse person, or whatever situation you're being put in. Be deliberate about making sure your voice is heard. Be deliberate about making sure all of your talents and skills are brought to the table and communicating with your team and leadership about what you believe you can give to the company. It's not an easy task. I mean, first thing I'm here to tell you, it's not an easy task. But again, with that normalization, making it part of our curriculums across the board, and if we have this unified effort, I think if we continue down this path we're on, we're definitely going to see the change that we know needs to happen.
You said both of you said some key words there and one of the things I want to continue to emphasize is intentionality. That, whether you have to do it as quote unquote a minority in your organization, or whether the organization itself decides that it's going to be intentional, that's really key. Because when you get intentional about it, you decide to make it real in your organization, which then opens up the conversation, which opens up opportunities for change in the organization, to become more diverse, more understanding, more sensitive, more passionate, maybe is not the appropriate word, but certainly more sensitive to allowing people of different backgrounds, their uniqueness, their ability to feel comfortable, to be who they are, as they call it, the authentic self in the environment, which then allow for them to be creative and to bring who they are and their opinions and ideas into that environment. So that intentionality is really, really important. And then I would also say looking at every aspect of the organization, whether it's nonprofit or profit, to how diversity can really have an impact and engage. I mentioned earlier at Jumpstart, and part of the things that we're doing is we're saying very intentionally, every aspect of the organization ought to value the diversity. And the way we do it is simply say, well, what's our population look like in terms of who we are, in terms of the employee force? What does our board look like? What is our suppliers, where we buy our supplies from? What does that look like? How are we communicating to our community? Because you can communicate in such a way that part of the community won't even hear you because you're disrespecting them in terms of how you deciding you want to communicate. So how are we doing that? How are we respecting people in our community? And sometimes that's unintentional, but it can form out in a way that you really are disrespecting populations and you really don't know it. So that means you have to have that sensitivity test, if you will, and become more aware, emotionally intelligent, I think is some of the terms that people use, and understanding how you engage with people that perhaps you have not engaged with, or populations that you have not engaged with before. Mm-hmm. I remember someone telling me about, the quote unquote handicap community and how our facility wasn't user friendly, and therefore you wasn't inviting. I never really thought about that, in terms of what we needed to do to make sure that we were saying it is okay for you to come in and be who you are. And we're very interested in you being a part of our experience, at Jumpstart, for example. So all of these things you have to be aware of and more sensitive to in order to invite diversity, to feel comfortable and to engage and to be a part of the creativity in your organization. Before I move anywhere else, I do want to take a time check. I'm not sure what our timing is. So Megan, if you're there, you can give me some insight into how much more time we have. And I don't see any questions in the chat at this point, but I'm certainly open to looking at some of those questions if the audience would like to engage.
Yeah, it actually looks like Megan had a question regarding EB-5 visas. And unfortunately, the only question we have is one that I am not prepared to answer. So I apologize, Megan. I personally have not encountered this specific visa. You could imagine there's a kaleidoscope of different visas. But the EB-5 visa, just at a cursory glance, appears to be a visa that you can obtain if you have an investment. And so if anyone in the community or in the audience knows better than me, I would assume that that is tied to already securing funding. But I'll take a look and I'll get back with you, Megan.
All right. Thank you very much for the time check. I see we have about 15 minutes left. Let me ask both of you, Megan and Amanda, excuse me, not Megan, Amanda and George. Let me ask you, what has been your experience in terms of some of the other challenges that you've had relative to engaging and getting the organizations that you've been either have worked with and or working with that been challenges in terms of this whole question of trying to become diverse and to celebrate that and to be comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. Awareness, right? And a unified understanding of what we're actually talking about. So again, between different people, you'll talk about D&I and you'll get different types of output. My daughter's school, for example, last year had a situation where a lot of inequity was brought to light on Instagram, and they immediately snapped to action to create a D&I task force, anti-racism task force to combat this. So in that instance, it was very clear what the goal was. The goal was to figure out why this is happening and how we can mitigate it. But during some open town hall discussions, there was a lot of chat conversation about, well, what about ableism? And what about this? And what about that? And so there's a lot wrapped into that statement, into that situation, because while that's a very good question, what about all those other inequities? But this forum was for this particular inequity, right? So there's a lack of understanding for the person in the comment section, but also I'm glad they put that there because that highlights something that honestly I wasn't even thinking about until I saw it in the chat. So there is no right or wrong. There is no, ultimate answer to everything. I think the challenge is people just being humbled, understanding that we don't have all the answers. We're in this situation because of a lot of ignorance, which is not a bad word in my book, a lot of miscommunication. And again, we are by design, we have this bias towards things that look and feel like we think and feel, or at least that are perceived that way. And we just really have to kind of get over ourselves and just really understand that, the world is larger than just us and our immediate circle. And there's no getting around it, at least, until Elon gets us there. We're all going to have to share the place for a while, right? And even when he does, we're still going to all have to share this place for quite some time. So I think that's the biggest challenge, right? I could give analogies across other spectrums, but I think that kind of summarizes my point. Just really understanding that it's like you said, Lamont, you have to have that emotional intelligence. You have to be able to see in a forum about racism, somebody talk about ableism and be able to go, okay, that's a valid point. And then not dismiss it and talk to it and say, you know what, you're absolutely right. Let's get together offline and we can create a forum for that topic too. And then we can engage with that topic too and give it the highlight that it deserves.
Yeah. Absolutely. Amanda?
Yeah, what an important point. It's and it's kind of related to my thought around there's a lot of people who want to make a difference and who want to change, but they are so uncomfortable and they're so scared of getting it wrong. And so we, as underrepresented communities, I think, again, this shouldn't be asked of us, but how can we help is by giving grace. And understanding that progress, we should be demanding progress, not perfection. These are systemic issues that take a really long time. And so for those who don't come from diverse backgrounds, who are looking to make an impact, know that you don't have to be perfect if you're well-intentioned and if you're truly taking the time to educate yourself, if you're showing up the best way that you can and have the best intentions, you're going to get it wrong and you probably will get yelled at by somebody, but that is not the end of the world because you're trying. And so for those that don't have diverse backgrounds, starting those conversations, but also not putting the onus on those underrepresented backgrounds to educate you. So to seek out, have those conversations, participate in panels like this, hear different perspectives, but also take self-accountability for doing the education, as uncomfortable as it may be.
Amanda, did you use the word grace? Did I hear you use that word?
Yes. It's one of my favorites with this. We all need to give each other a little grace sometimes.
I love that. I love that word. And I love the fact that you brought it out because it's so important in this process that we honor each other with a little bit of grace in order for us to move forward. And I'll give you an example of it. I know all of us, particularly people like myself, and I happen to be a sensitive guy, so just so you all know that up front, here I'm an African-American male. I'm obviously trying to, move an agenda forward for Jumpstart. And I find myself and my organization getting a lot of criticism for things that we're not doing in the community. And yet I'm a part of the community on the other side as an African-American trying to make some things happen. but the various different populations and people that are interested in this diversity question, and as you said so well, George, there's a whole lot of different diversity. Some of that, you get some harsh criticism, and you have those moments where you feel like you're the bad guy, and you're almost like, why am I putting myself through this?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've had to learn is, because of the history, because of the situation we're in, I can't be so sensitive about that. I have to really understand and give myself some grace for the mistakes that I'm going to make as I try to move forward in this whole idea of accepting the diversity among all of us. And you're just not going to get it right. You're going to say some things, and they're going to be either the wrong thing to say, or certainly maybe not interpreted differently than you intended, and you're going to get some criticism back. But we have to step out there, be willing to put ourselves out there for the good of society, for the good of our organization, for the good of change in our organization, in order for us to really be able to move forward. And it does. I will tell you, there are days when I'm shaking my head and saying, "Oh, I'm through." But as I look at the history, and I'll just say as a personal question, personal testimony, as I look at what others before me have done, certainly from a historic perspective, from the African American experience in America, I can't really say, okay, I'm throwing up my hands and I'm giving up. It's just not possible to do that. I have to keep going forward to help as best I can, not only the perspective of an African American, but the perspective of all diversity. Because I do believe, I sincerely believe, that if we celebrate diversity of all kinds, we're going to be in a better society. That's for sure. But I also think that we'll be better in terms of the results and the solutions, and in the future of both this country and the world, for that matter. So we just have to hang in there, take a few hits, and make the situation better for all of us.
That's a great point. Your point actually highlighted something in my mind that's worth mentioning, which is those of us who come from underrepresented backgrounds and we're working in organizations that are imperfect. Sometimes we get criticism from our own communities to say, hey, like, you're part of the problem. You're in this organization. I don't see you investing in female founders. I get sometimes, or, you're doing this diverse innovation panel, but you're a white woman, or, there's all sorts of criticisms that will come. And so I think, again, giving each other a little bit of grace and knowing that people from underrepresented backgrounds who have the opportunity to be in these privileged positions are oftentimes working really, really hard internally, and it's not always visible to those communities. And so, again, it's progress, not perfection, of saying, hey, to my community or other underrepresented communities, I'm working hard for you in here, and it's not going to happen overnight. These are issues that are hundreds of years old and started well before us.
That is so true. That is so true.
And to your point, the tax for being inclusive and realizing this diversity is that there's going to be conflicting interests. There's going to be conflicting ideas. People aren't going to always understand. Things aren't going to translate naturally. It comes with the territory, and it's a tax we have to pay for it. So it goes back to that emotional intelligence, the understanding, the grace, the awareness. All of those things, I agree, are key components of that.
Totally.
So there's a question here, I think. I always feel getting into the youth sooner is better. Does the panel have any ideas on how we would address this? Like, should we be doing innovation sooner, like in our high school?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Amanda.
Yes, absolutely. We our founder, Scott Dorsey, he was lucky enough to have a substantial exit of his company, which allowed him to start an organization called Next Tech here in Indiana. And so Next Tech has been working for the past 8 years. I'm probably going to get that wrong, but that organization lobbied, and eventually, after years and years of work and investment, was able to lobby the state of Indiana to include computer science as a requirement for public schools. I have a woman that I work with, Tamoya Hopkins. She's an incredible woman, and she actually, on top of her very demanding career, she has a whole other nonprofit where she goes into Indianapolis Public Schools, which is our most urban schools, and goes in and volunteers to meet some of those requirements for school districts who maybe don't have the resources to now meet this requirement, which was so well intentioned, but that can react negatively on their school. So the answer is yes, we totally should make it happen as early as possible. Somebody said kindergarten. I think that's right.
All right, I can agree with that. George, you have a comment on that? And I did see another comment about.
Yeah. No, Amanda and I, we're lockstep on all of these things. But I will just say that, when we started our organization, we had the intent of working with the business owners in the community. But we had a milestone roadmap, Marshot goal of actually getting down to the kids. Because, as a parent, and I think most parents probably understand this, you realize that it does start at a young age, and it really forms how they think about things. The reason I feel the way I do about the world is largely in part of the way I was raised, and I have to be deliberate about fighting that. So how do you prevent that? Is you expose them into that diversity and that innovation early on. And we had the privilege of being able to do that this summer with some contracts we took on with the Urban League for their workforce development and youth summer programs. And so that really like upward spiraled us and made us more impassioned about being able to do these types of engagements going forward. So where it was like a roadmap item, it's now front and center to us. So absolutely a resounding yes to that.
And I'll go ahead and certify that I'm older than both of you all, by the way, if you notice. So I'm actually a grandfather, and I've watched my grandkids they just seem to be very into technology, very open to all of the STEM opportunities. Looking at some of their homework assignments and says, you know what, I really can't help you. and what it says to me, though, is that there's a willingness, there's an opportunity, the earlier the better, I think, to engage and to allow them to experience all that's available. And I think they're going to take us to a whole nother level if we encourage that and do that, certainly. So what are we thinking about the landscape of the diverse innovation as we come to the end of our term here, panel discussion? How are we feeling about it? Are we thinking more positively, or is it neutral? What do you think?
Oh, okay, I'll jump in. First, big shout out to Dan. And I'm a fan of yours. You've been one of the key people I've identified when I first got to Columbus, and you've been super engaged during this conference. So I really appreciate you being part of the conversation and everything you are offering the community. So shout out, Dan. And I think it's growing. I think we're getting there. All you really have is your own perspective. And like I think Neil deGrasse Tyson made a comment about the larger your knowledge level grows out, also the larger your level of ignorance grows around that. Less about more. But from my perspective and what I can see, I do feel like we're getting there. But I say that cautiously optimistic because I am part of that. I've inserted myself into that community, and to be honest, I'm really not getting a good feel of what the rest of my community is thinking about this. And we're actively trying to figure out ways to really poll our community and get a sense of what's really going on out there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the days are long and the years are short. Makes me think of the progress we're making in these initiatives, where these are systemic issues that are not some that we can't put a quick fix on many of the reasons why it's so difficult for diverse backgrounds to be innovators and leaders. But if we look back 20 years ago, we would not have been having this panel, for example. There were no impact funds, there were no fellowships, there were no conversations happening like these. So I think that if we were to look at the data over the next few years, we're going to see those numbers that I referenced earlier slowly climb and climb. So yeah, right now there's all sorts of initiatives that's from impact funds to accelerators to fellowships to the work that we're doing in K through 12 to scholarships for underrepresented backgrounds to actually get educated to take some of these roles. So all that being said, I'm very optimistic, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And I feel optimistic too. I feel optimistic about the work that I'm doing, even though I expressed earlier how sometimes it's so hard to come in certain days because of maybe some people not understanding what we're attempting to do and how we are trying to make a really intentional effort to change our actions and to really be a better part of society and our community. So that Jumpstart, in this case, can have a better impact and a more engaged impact with our community. But I do feel good about it. I really do. When I look at the overall picture, and I look at the young people who I see engaging with society a little different than perhaps traditionalists have done so. I've got that optimistic feel about it, and I haven't had that all the time. So I'm feeling much better about what it looks like in terms of the future. I did want to also give a shout out to Dan too. Dan pointed out something about minority founders in our chat. Minority founders are really getting more aggressive about the opportunities that are available to them with the federal government programs, grants that are available, and other initiatives that are in place that we should be taking care of. So should be aware of and taking advantage of. And just wanted to point that out. I saw it go by and pulled it back up because I thought it was worthy of making sure that we acknowledge that. So thank you, Dan, for that as well. All right. Well, any closing comments, Amanda or George? What would you say to us to encourage us in this conversation?
I would just say thank you so much for having me for this important conversation. It's really been a pleasure, and this is a great conference.
I would agree with that.
Likewise. I'm really honored to be able to be part of this conversation and actually be part of this entrepreneurial ecosystem. I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to meet you guys and look forward to further communication. Of anything, the hardest thing overall, I think, is just managing all of the relationships and getting engaged with all of the folks that are doing great work like you guys out here. That's the hardest part. I need a team just for that. So.
Well, I certainly agree with both of you all's comments, and thank you guys for your contributions this morning and your engagement on it's a very important subject, in my opinion. It's been my pleasure to get to know both of you all too, because we really didn't know each other before we got together and created this panel. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for the privilege of being also on the panel with both of you, sharing this opportunity with both of you, but also the audience and the opportunity through this conference. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And again, because of this interaction, I'm even more enthused. And I'm an old guy, so I really got to get it going. But I'm really enthused about the opportunity to continue, all of our work to champion diversity and how it can be so, if we buy into it, so powerful for our communities, both locally, nationally, and worldwide. So thank you again for being a part of the discussion, and thank you all for having us in this environment.
Well, thank you, to all three of you. Just a really great discussion, really insightful, great nuggets to take away. So we really appreciate all of you participating in the Great Lakes Innovation Summit. It's people like you that make the summit work. And thank you for all of you that put questions in. We're going to take a quick 15-minute break, let you go grab a cup of coffee or tea, come back and join us for another great conversation surrounding finance innovation. So that session will start at 10:45, and we'll see you soon.